So back in the 80s when I went to college, letters, ink on paper was still a thing, right? That's how you kept in touch with people. And when I went away to college, so the mail room at college actually was really very special, especially in the first weeks of college when we were still fresh from summer on the beach promises. We were going to write everybody every week. And when you went to the mail room, it was awesome, right? Because you got letters and it was really awesome. But as time stretched out into my freshman year, when I went to the mailroom, it was more often a disappointment than it was joyful. And I mentioned this to my father when I was talking to him on the phone. And he said, you know, Beth, really in your life, the only way to be sure that you're going to get a letter, there's only two ways. You can apply for a credit card or you can write to your grandfather. So my grandfather was known to be a very intimidating pen pal. So grandpa had retired as a mailman, so he knew exactly when the mail came. As soon as he got your letter, he read it, and as soon as he finished reading it, he got out his pad and he wrote you back, and he put it in the mail. So there was no downtime between writing to grandpa. I had always lived about 1,000 miles away from him, but I knew where his pad was on his chair next to the window, and it was, you know, just the right size to fit in an envelope, so there was no folding on the sides. Despite my hesitation, Grandpa and I became pen pals when I was a freshman in college. And letters trailed off a little bit for me when I got into medical school. And I got married, had a residency, started a family, lots of stuff going on. Grandpa's letters continued, however, and Grandpa's letters were kind of a mess of cursive. Anybody remember cursive? Like that was way back, right? And if his letters had not always followed exactly the same arc through exactly the same day that he had, I'm not sure I could have remembered them. But, you know, there was the tribulations of Donna, the donut shop waitress that he visited every morning at 5 a.m., followed by second breakfast with Grandma, followed by what he bought at the grocery store. He went to the grocery store every day. It was on sale. It was the best cantaloupe ever. And then he would sit on his front porch, and then he would play cards, and then he would talk about Vanna White. And then when did he fall asleep watching the ball game? That was Grandpa's day all the time. After our residency, we were fortunate enough, my whole family, to get stationed about 40 minutes from where Grandpa lived. So I didn't need to write to him then, but all my kids got to know him. So when we moved away after 3 years, we had a whole family pen pal with Grandpa Jack. And one of our favorite activities when we went on vacation was that who could find the most exotic postcard that would get the best reaction from Grandpa Jack when we sent it, because usually there would be a letter by the time we got home talking about the postcard that we'd sent him on vacation. Before we moved away from St. Louis, my grandparents were probably in their late 70s at that point, and we made sure that everybody had a healthcare power of attorney and a living will. As a short commercial break, everyone should have that right now. This is a time of great medical uncertainty. If you don't have one, get one. Paper, ink, do it. But he chose me to be his healthcare power of attorney. I was a doctor. It kind of made sense, but I really think my major qualification was the fact that I knew about his days. So I felt pretty comfortable making decisions about him. As grandparents moved into their 80s, they moved into assisted living facility, still getting letters. Sphere of his day was a little smaller, but the content was largely the same, just different characters. Grandma died the year that she was 90. Predictably, Grandpa began his decline shortly thereafter. My aunts called me one day and asked me to talk to him. His legs had gotten so swollen he couldn't get out of his room anymore by himself, and he was refusing to go to the doctor. I still remember the view from the stairwell in the hospital I slipped into here. He was still in St. Louis to talk to him. I can't live forever, Beth, he said. That was not the point. I said, you know, you're a pretty gumpy guy at baseline, and if you can't get out of your room, like nobody's really going to come visit you. So I really think you need to go see the doctor. So he agreed, but only if I promised there was going to be no foolishness. So predictably, doctor's office led to the hospital, and that was his final decline. On the phone, I refused the feeding tube that was recommended. That was clearly foolishness for a man whose letters had always revolved around food. And predictably, speech therapists are no dummies. He aspirated about 3 days later. Food going into his lungs, couldn't breathe. Grilled the doctor after stepping out of a meeting here to make sure everything that was not foolishness had been done, and then asked him to gather the family and make him comfortable. So that same year, as if I didn't need another lesson in frailty, I was told by my orthopedic surgeon friend that running every day was something that I was too old for. Running had been something I did every day for the last 20 years. And I was pretty tough, but I decided I was going to rally. I was going to have to do something different, and I was going to swim. So I thought I knew how to swim. By me knowing how to swim, what I meant was that if I fell in a pool, I wasn't going to drown. But that was not what it took to actually swim for exercise. So I came up after one length on my first foray, gasping, and I floundered literally for a few weeks before I found a swimming program called Total Immersion. If you ever want to learn to swim, that's definitely the way to go, especially if you're not 15. And his philosophy was not about getting stronger. His philosophy was about becoming more fish-like. That sounded good. So more fish-like. And the thing that struck me, and it was the most important in the lessons that I had, was he talked about breathing underwater. Half of breathing you can do underwater. The out part, in case you were wondering about that. So the out part you can do underwater. And after I figured that out, like my swimming actually got a lot better. And by the fall of the next year, I was swimming pretty regularly and I felt pretty comfortable. And as I was getting ready for our Svetic Family Hoedown, which is an annual event, we're now in our 13th year. And it is my favorite part of that party is that we square dance in the garage. The fact that my teenagers let me have this party, I clutched to me as a reason to know that they still love me, even though they were teenagers and otherwise it was not obvious. But the reason the neighbors came was to this party was that I made Grandpa Jack's chili for the whole neighborhood, and it was very popular. And I was in the habit of, while I was making the chili, I would call him. He hated to talk on the phone. You could never get him to talk for very long. But if you were talking about chili, he would talk to you for a few minutes. And I had actually taken a step towards the phone before I realized that, of course, this year I couldn't call him because he was gone. And so I stepped back to finish chopping up my onions. And the conversation that we always had started running through my head. And of course, yes, I had remembered the green peppers. I know I forgot them the first year, but I remember the green peppers. And no, I wasn't going to use white sugar. You told me brown sugar. And the fact that I had substituted half of the meat with beans would never came up because that was not to be discussed with my grandfather. And I thought, wow, like, this is cool. He's gone, but I got to know him well enough. I was fortunate enough that I could still have most of this conversation with him, just like breathing underwater.